Humboldt County, Nevada, September 3rd, 1897. 11 in the morning. The plate was in the developing bath, and the image was coming up wrong. Not wrong the way an underexposed plate comes up wrong, pale, thin, lacking shadow detail. Wrong in a different way. The figure in the center of the frame was resolving at a density that should have required twice the exposure time Francis Greer had given it, and the background behind the figure, the limestone wall of the cave at the back of the hollow, was resolving too faint, as if the main subject was drawing the emulsion's response to itself, concentrating the silver reduction in its own form at the expense of everything around it. In 22 years of working with glass plates, Francis Greer had never seen a subject print heavy while its background printed thin. Silver emulsion responded to light. More light meant more exposure, meant denser image. The figure had not been in more light than the wall behind it. It had been in less light, because it had been standing in the shadow of the overhang while Greer set up his tripod and made his plate. Less light should have meant a thinner image. The plate was telling him something he did not have a category for. He was 44 years old. He had been the only professional photographer in Winnemucca, Nevada since 1875, operating first from a tent studio on the main road, and then from a permanent building on Bridge Street since 1882. His practice covered the full range of work available to a county photographer in the Nevada interior: portrait work, property documentation for mining claims, the occasional commercial commission from the railroad. He owned 4 cameras, 12 glass plate holders, and a portable developing kit that he had modified twice over 22 years to improve field performance in the alkaline dust and dry heat of the high desert. He knew his equipment, and he knew silver emulsion chemistry, and he knew that the plate in the bath was showing him something that his equipment and his chemistry did not account for. He lifted the plate from the bath. The image had stopped developing. It had reached whatever density the emulsion was going to reach, and he held it to the light from the developing tent's yellow safe light and looked at what he had. But here is what the Nevada State Bureau of Mines and the Smithsonian Institution have spent 127 years making sure you never ask about. Humboldt County in the late 1890s was silver and cattle country, with a secondary economy in the borax and cinnabar mining that the Humboldt Range's geology supported. Winnemucca was the county seat, a working town of roughly 1,500 people on the Central Pacific Line, its economy built on the supply and service needs of the mines in the ranges to the north and east. Francis Greer had documented most of those mines: the claim photographs, the shaft entrance images, the portrait work for the mine manager's offices, and he knew the terrain of Humboldt County the way a man knows country he has traveled professionally for 22 years. He knew the hollow above Grass Valley Creek on the eastern face of the Humboldt Range because he had been there once before, in 1889, to photograph a mining claim boundary for a silver prospector named Albert Causeway, who had since abandoned the claim and left the county. The hollow was not on any active claim in September 1897. It was unworked ground, 3 miles from the nearest operating mine, accessible only by a track that became impassable in wet weather. Greer had gone back to it in September 1897 because of what a Paiute man named Wesley had told him in late August. Wesley was approximately 60 years old and had been a regular presence in Winnemucca since Greer's arrival in 1875. He worked occasionally as a guide for survey crews and mining parties and spoke serviceable English. In late August 1897, he came to Greer's studio on Bridge Street and told him that there were figures in the cave at the back of the hollow above Grass Valley Creek. He had seen them twice, he said, once in the spring when water was running in the creek, and once the previous autumn when the creek was dry. The same figures both times, in the same positions. He said they were small, smaller than a child of 10 years, and that they had been there for as long as anyone in his family could remember. He said his grandfather had known about them and had said they were not made by any people his grandfather knew. He said he had told Greer because Greer was the man in the county who could make a record of things, and he thought this was something that should be in a record. Greer went to the hollow 4 days later with his field camera and his portable kit. Wesley came with him as guide and waited outside the cave while Greer set up inside. The cave was not a natural formation in the standard sense. The back wall had been worked, showing the same smooth, deliberate surface treatment that Greer had seen in the adits of blasted mine shafts, but without the blast pattern the shot rock left. The working was older than any mine in the county. The floor was flat and smooth for approximately 20 feet from the entrance, and at the back of the flat section, along the north wall, there were 3 of them. They were seated. All 3, in the same posture, knees drawn up, arms resting on the knees, the head slightly inclined forward. The largest of the 3 measured, when Greer later paced the dimensions, approximately 3.5 feet from the base of the seated position to the top of the skull. He had no ruler with him. He paced. He was not a man who worked without measurement. He could not afford to be, in a business where plate exposure and lens distance required calculation. And he estimated the largest figure at 3.5 feet seated height, with the confidence of a man who estimated distances for a living. The proportions were not those of a child of 3.5 feet. The limb ratios, the skull-to-torso ratio, the width of the shoulders, belonged to an adult, or to something that had reached its full physical development at a height no adult human being in Humboldt County approached. He set up his tripod, calculated the exposure for the available light, made his plate, and came out. He did not touch the figures. He did not attempt to move them or examine them closely. He had been photographing things professionally for 22 years, and he understood that the documentary value of an image depended on the subject being in the condition he found it. He made his record and left. The plate he developed in his tent outside the hollow was the one that came up wrong. What the safe light showed him was this. 3 figures in a seated posture, their outlines resolved to a density heavier than the limestone wall behind them. Their features clear enough to see in the developed image. The inclined heads, the proportions of the limbs, the posture identical on all 3. And, in the foreground between the nearest figure and the camera, a shadow cast by the figure on the cave floor that did not match the direction of the available light in the cave. The light had come from the entrance, behind Greer and his camera. The shadow on the cave floor extended toward the entrance. Shadows extend away from their light source. The figure's shadow was pointing at Greer. He looked at the plate for a long time. Then he wrapped it in his carrying cloth and packed his kit and walked back to where Wesley was waiting at the hollow's entrance. He showed Wesley the developed plate in the field light. Wesley looked at it for a long time too and did not say anything. They walked back to the horses and rode back to Winnemucca, and Wesley did not speak again on the ride back, which was not his habit on the road. Greer printed the plate that evening in his studio darkroom. He made 4 prints on albumin paper, his standard print stock. 3 of the 4 prints showed what the plate had showed: the 3 seated figures, the wrong shadow, the heavy resolution against the thin background. The 4th print was blank. Not underexposed, blank. The same plate, the same process, the same paper stock, and 1 print out of 4 came out as if nothing had been in front of the camera. He noted this in his job log, which he kept for every commission and every significant personal work, as a standard record-keeping practice. He wrote, 3 figures, Grass Valley Hollow, September 3, 1897. Plate developed heavy on subject. Shadow direction wrong. 4 prints made. 3 showed, 1 blank. Cause unknown. He wrote a letter the following week to the Nevada State Bureau of Mines, which had administrative authority over geological survey and mineral resources in the county, and which occasionally forwarded unusual site reports to federal institutions. He described the figures, gave their approximate dimensions, described the worked cave wall, and offered to send a print for institutional review. He included the observation about the shadow direction. The Bureau of Mines replied in October. The response, signed by a deputy surveyor whose name Greer noted in his job log, stated that the Bureau's mandate covered mineral resources and geological survey, and that the figures he described fell outside its institutional scope. It suggested he contact the Nevada State Museum in Carson City. Greer wrote to Carson City. Carson City replied that the State Museum did not yet have a physical anthropology or archaeology collection, and suggested he contact the Bureau of American Ethnology in Washington. Greer wrote to the Bureau in November 1897. He described the find, the dimensions, the cave, and the plate. He offered to send a print. The Bureau's response, which he received in January 1898, was a form letter acknowledging his communication and noting that the Bureau received a significant volume of reports regarding unusual finds in Nevada and would be in contact if follow-up was required. No follow-up was requested. No one came to Winnemucca. No one asked for the print. In the spring of 1898, a man who identified himself as a traveling naturalist and who carried a letter of introduction from a faculty member at the University of Nevada appeared at Greer's studio on Bridge Street and asked to see the Grass Valley photograph. Greer showed him the 3 prints. The naturalist examined them for approximately 20 minutes, made some notes, and asked if he could purchase one of the prints. Greer quoted him a price. The naturalist paid it, took the print, thanked Greer, and left. He did not return. His name, as given on the letter of introduction, was Theodore Barnes. The University of Nevada faculty member who had written the letter of introduction was a geology professor whose name Greer noted in his job log. A search of the University of Nevada's faculty records for the period 1895 through 1905, conducted by the independent researcher Patricia Strand in the autumn of 2022, found no geology faculty member of that name on the university's staff during that period. The letter of introduction had been written on University of Nevada letterhead, in the correct format, with the correct administrative details of the period. The faculty member it named did not exist. 2 prints remained in Greer's possession after the Barnes visit. Greer kept them in a portfolio folder with the job log entry and his correspondence with the Bureau of Mines, the State Museum, and the Bureau of American Ethnology. When he died in 1924, the portfolio passed to his wife, and from his wife to their daughter, Clara Greer Nichols, who moved to Reno in 1931. Clara wrote to her sister in 1936, a letter that is in a private family collection in Reno, describing the photographs as showing something she could not explain, and that she had shown to no one since her father's death except her husband, who had told her to put them away. She described the figures as being in the photograph exactly as her father had described them in his job log, seated 3.5 feet at the height of the tallest, the shadow pointing the wrong direction. She said she kept the photographs because her father had made them, and they were his work, and she was not going to destroy his work, but that she did not put them on display and did not discuss them, and that the portfolio was on the shelf in her sewing room, where she knew where it was. Clara died in 1971. The portfolio passed to her son, Robert Nichols of Reno, who did not know what to do with old photographs from a long-dead grandfather's career, and donated the contents of Clara's estate papers to the Nevada Historical Society in Reno in 1972. The Nevada Historical Society accessioned the materials and placed them in its photographic archive. The finding aid for the Greer collection describes it as Professional Photography Archive, Winnemucca, Nevada, 1875 through 1924, including portraits, mining claim documentation, and miscellaneous fieldwork. The Grass Valley hollow prints are in the miscellaneous fieldwork folder. The job log is with them. The correspondence with the Bureau of Mines, the State Museum, and the Bureau of American Ethnology is with them. The finding aid does not describe the Grass Valley prints specifically. The miscellaneous fieldwork folder has not been requested by any researcher since the collection was accessioned in 1972. The physical anomaly in the Grass Valley hollow prints is not the figures themselves, it is the shadow. A shadow that extends toward the light source rather than away from it represents a physical impossibility in standard optics. Silver emulsion records the light reflected from a subject's surface and the absence of light in areas blocked from illumination. A shadow is an area of reduced illumination, falling in the direction opposite to the light source. In Greer's plate, the shadow falls toward the light source. This means either that the figure between the camera and the cave wall was reflecting light in a direction inconsistent with its physical relationship to the light source, that the surface of the figure was producing or redirecting light in a way that standard photographic chemistry does not account for, or that the plate contains an artifact of the development process that produced an anomalous result. Greer was a professional who had developed plates in field conditions for 22 years. He noted the shadow direction specifically in his job log because he recognized it as anomalous. He had no explanation. He noted it and made his record. The Tartarian hypothesis places the Grass Valley Hollow figures in a context that the Nevada State Museum's physical anthropology collection, which was not established until 1941, has never been asked to address. A pre-Columbian civilization of significant technological capacity, operating across the breadth of North America, whose physical remains included individuals of non-standard anatomy, figures of 3.5 feet of adult proportion, seated in a worked stone chamber on the eastern face of the Humboldt Range, in a posture that Wesley's grandfather had known about, and that no Paiute oral tradition assigned to any people his grandfather recognized. The Paiute oral record of the Great Basin is extensive, and has been documented by academic anthropologists since the 1880s. It consistently distinguishes between the people who came before, the ancestors, and the other people, the ones who were in the caves and the high places, and who were not the ancestors, and were not enemies, and were simply, in the most precise available translation, the ones who were already here. The figures in the Grass Valley Hollow were the ones who were already here. Wesley knew what they were. He went to Greer because he wanted a record made. He understood, in 1897, that the record was what would remain when everything else was gone. The Nevada Historical Society is in Reno. The Greer Collection Finding Aid is on the Society's website. The miscellaneous fieldwork folder is accessible by appointment. The 2 remaining prints are in it, with the job log and the 3 letters. The shadow on the cave floor in those prints has been pointing the wrong direction for 127 years. No permit application for any construction or survey activity in the area of Grass Valley Hollow appears in the Humboldt County Recorder's records for any date after 1897. The hollow is in the Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest, designated federal land since 1909. The Forest Service's administrative records for the Grass Valley area, requested in a formal inquiry filed by Patricia Strand in the spring of 2023, were returned with a notation that records pertaining to specific geological features within wilderness designation areas were subject to a resource protection hold pending a land use review initiated in 2019. The land use review has not been completed. The Forest Service's online portal for the relevant management unit shows the Grass Valley area as under active administrative review with no projected completion date. The review was initiated 4 years ago. The figures in the cave have been there for longer than any administrative review has been ongoing. Francis Greer, 44 years old. September 3, 1897. The plate was in the developing bath, and the image was coming up heavy on the subject and thin on the wall, and wrong in a way that 22 years of professional practice had not prepared him for. He lifted the plate from the bath. He held it to the safe light. He looked at the shadow on the cave floor in the developed image, the shadow that pointed toward the entrance, toward him, toward the camera that had made the plate. He held the plate for a long time. Then he packed his kit and walked back to where Wesley was waiting and showed him what the plate had captured. Wesley looked at it and did not say anything, and they rode back to Winnemucca in silence. The 2 prints are in Reno, in the miscellaneous fieldwork folder, with the job log entry that describes the blank 4th print and the wrong direction shadow. The figures in the Grass Valley Hollow are presumably still there, in their seated posture against the north wall, in the worked stone cave on the eastern face of the Humboldt Range, in the darkness that no photographer has entered since September 3rd, 1897. The priest in Carroll County, Maryland, who translated the inscription in 1863 and burned the translation before Sunday, understood that certain records are made to be destroyed. Greer understood the opposite, that the record is the only thing that survives when everything else is taken. He made his record. It is in Reno. The fourth print that came out blank is the one that was taken.